Okay, let's continue. We're in the middle of Hilchos Netilas Yadaim. Just to review, we learned last week some fascinating halachos. We learned the makar. The makar, as we actually just mentioned, sirach truma, the makar, that everything becomes tamei. And I wanted to point out that you were correct, that water always gets bumped up to a rishon. That's the reason we were speaking about last week. And we mentioned how many times you wash your hands, and that's the detail I want to pick up from, because that's where we're going to see this din of, are you allowed to touch someone else? What if you touch your own hand? What if someone else touches you? Does it make a difference if they touch you while your hands are wet, when your hands are dry? What's called wet? And what if you already made the bracha? That's really what we're going to focus on today, which probably, I don't want to say is one of the larger myths in halacha, but this is like one of those things that kids love. I touch your hands, you got to wash again. I made a bracha, I didn't make a bracha, I have to dry my hands. Then you see those guys that before they're washing Netilas Yadaim, they're sitting there drying off the skin off their hand, literally. And you're like, what are you doing, So that's what we're going to focus in on today. So in order to get there, how many times do you wash your hands? So I think the most, there's nothing in there, I'm sorry. The most, but there's napkins in the back. But the most contemporary is that people wash 2 times. People wash 2 times. We said, Al Pi Kabbalah, some people wash 3 times. And we quoted from the Chazon Ish that if you do a shvicha gedolah, you do a revius bevas achas, do a large quantity of water, you could even wash 1 time, and that is what the Chazon Ish used to do, as well as the stapler. The stapler, the stapler didn't. That was the unique part of it. Stapler didn't. Chazon Ish washed 1 time, and the stapler did not. And we just mentioned, and some people actually came back, they did their own science fair experiments, that when you focus on washing with a lot of water at 1 time, often you're better at getting your whole hand between the fingers. You're closer to getting it all wet. I'll mention though the Piskei Teshuvos, who's a Chassidish Yid, Rabbi Rabinowitz from Eretz Yisrael. He lives in, the brain just turned off. Okay, it will come to me soon. It doesn't really make a difference. But he writes that even if you're the Chazon Ish, but you're forgetting that Al Pi Kabbalah and Al Pi Soy, there's myriadic things to wash multiple times. And he says Al Pi Kabbalah, listen to this one. So last week we said there's 3 ways of washing your hands. We said either do it 3 times, 2 times, or 1 time. So we all assume that means 1, or 1, 2, or 1, 2, 3. He says Al Pi Kabbalah, you got it all wrong. He says Al Pi Kabbalah, you do 1, 2, 1, 2. Then you do an extra 1 on each one. Why? I have no clue, but he says it Al Pi Kabbalah, and so if you ever see people doing funny things, maybe they're misguided, or maybe they're, tremendous tzaddikim. We mentioned last week how much of the hand. We said the hand goes to the wrist. You have to wash the wrist, but it is important to note that the fingers are the most important, and we all know that ourselves from Tisha B'Av, from Yom Kippur. When you wash just to the knuckles, that's really the most important, but one really has to be makbid on the whole hands, and we spoke about this little area over here that gets very problematic, that when you pour the water, somehow it just doesn't make that turn, and even if you spin it, that is the difficult point. So now, the question is, can you touch? What happens? Let's just play it out. Why you wash?
We were just discussing last week also because you said you can't touch the bread.
Uh-huh.
We were discussing, and the question is, how come you can handle the bread all before?
Oh, so this is something that we're not going to, we have to one day come back to.
So
You ask you a very good question.
just ceremonial?
You ask you a very good question, and we're not going to yet have a good answer. We're going to touch upon points of it, but I just want to go one step further with your question. Let's first play out the tumah part, and we'll go there. So again, I come to wash my hands. I take the cup. I pour 1 time on my hands. Why do I pour a second time? Because my hands were tummy, perhaps, potentially, assumingly. And then the first pouring of water, now the water's tummy. So I need another pouring of water to remove the tummy waters. However, if I pour a full revius at 1 time, then the water doesn't become tummy. The whole thing comes off at once. That is the way it works. Similar if you do Tevila, if you go into the mikvah and you come out, we don't say the water on you is tameh. We say that everything is tar. Similarly, if you were to stick your hands into a mikvah, which also works, everything becomes tar instantaneously. So the question is, so now, I washed one time, my hands now have tameh water on them. Good. I washed the second time. It's a less than Arvis. Yes. That's a disclaimer we're going to have to keep coming back to. You wash a second time, now it's all tar water. So now my hand is tar with tar water on it. But my left hand is tameh. If my left hand now touches my right hand, what did I just do? I just touched a liquid. Liquid is a conduit for tuma. Now I just made my right hand tameh again. No, the hand, I washed 2 times. Again, the first time washed off the tumah but kept the water tummy. The second time, what? Now it goes backwards.
No, your hand's still tummy the same way. When you pour on one less than a Vias,
yeah.
Now the water's tummy.
Good.
So what's it touching?
Good. Well, yeah, I'm telling you, you did it 2 times. Again, nachama.
Second time you say shouldn't help.
You washed away the tumah.
No, but the tummy's getting now when your other hand touches it.
Now, right. Correct. That's the problem.
No.
We're not talking about the first and second. After the second.
No, he's saying right after the first.
Well, that's before after the first. You're asking a good question. Before after the first. Let's go slowly. After the second washing, your hand is tahar. Good. I touch it with a tameh hand. Not good.
No, get there.
Your hand is tar. So you just raise the tuma into the water. But now the
Good.
water is still sitting on
Good. Yeah.
The tuma that comes
Good.
So why
Yeah.
is it not becoming your hands now? That point?
Because then the second time.
No, before that. Right now.
Good. Because the answer is that the tummy water isn't going to be mitame you unless it's going to be read. Now this is a big discussion, very big discussion. There's a large shartzian over here. There's a very big Magen Avram and Pri Megadim, all trying to figure out. Which really goes back to your question, which is what I was trying to play out. Is that if right now someone touches my hand, I don't have to all of a sudden go and what's going on over here. So it is somewhat a din while you're during the netila of your hands that we're more makbid. The reason for that is not very clear. It doesn't seem to be a very simple reason why we're only makbid during the netila. As we're about to see in a moment, once you make the bracha, it lowers it a level. Once you dry your hands, it lowers it a level. And we're going to let you even continue and make your bracha. I don't understand this question. No?
I'm trying to say, like, when you go into the mikvah,
Yeah.
you come out of the mikvah, right when you go into the mikvah, something else, you put your tummy right back in because it's water. So the first pour.
That's the creation of a mikvah. Again, let's go more fundamental.
So the first pour, the water should pull out.
No, that's not his question. Wow.
It's like you have a layer on the water level. It's like not even touching you. It's coming. It's like it's not
He said by
touching you.
Rabbi
It's white.
is more than it is.
Become
The whole
coming
thing
again.
washed off.
How do I put the tuma?
See, that's when it's less than
The
that.
tuma is on the water.
Now,
But
what
now
is
the
water on the hand?
But the water is touching your hand.
It's on the
So
right,
it
but
should
that-
be time
the
in your
question
hands
is based
again.
on the fact that when you
The
get two
tuma
times
didn't
now,
go
it's
away
right?
yet.
What
It's
if
just
your right
lying
hand
there.
touches it?
It's just like
That's why you pour a second time
before that. So at that
and it washes it off.
That's the second time, but before the second time.
The same way if
Not-
your other hand you touch it. it would
So
make it
I'm not fully following. I don't want to. Maybe it's an issue with me. But let's just try to go on because we probably could talk about this for 45 minutes, which is okay. But I don't know if everyone else is going to appreciate it. So let's try to hold it. I think you are touching on a touching, no pun intended, on a very good point. But let's just go in what the halacha says. What the halacha says, and a lot of this is our dinim d'Rabbanan that have to do with the washing your hands. So again, you wash your hands 2 times, now your hand is tar. You touch it with your left hand, now your hand becomes tummy. Good. Let's say I wash with a full revius. Does that din apply?
No.
It would seem to say no.
Oh yes, but because you're still touching that water on your hand.
Good. If I wash with a full revius, let's just go slowly so we all can be on the same page over here. I take a full revius of water and I dump it all over my hand. What's his hand? Tahar. Could this hand now become tamei? It would seem no. But the answer is yes. So let's. I don't want to make this too complicated because I see some people are losing interest in the fine nuance over here. So let's read it. Let's read it inside so we can all appreciate the words of the Mechaber of the Shulchan Aruch, and then we'll move on. Shafach mayim al yodei achas. You pour water on one hand, then you pour the water on the second hand. So he says, what do you have to do? Lefikach hanoitel yadav You got to pour a second time. Someone else should do it. No, I'm sorry. Is that what I want to read to you? I mean, they didn't put it in the booklet, so we have to get more Mishnah. I don't know why they didn't put the Shulchan Aruch in the booklets. I can't fully understand that. I think it's because you're supposed to have your own Shulchan Aruch. But either way, excuse me. If you pour a full revius in your hands, this part we could all agree to. If you pour a full revius, you don't need more water. Why not? So far we've learned one simple halacha. If I pour not so much water, it becomes tummy. I pour more water, it washes off the tumah. I do the same thing to my other hands. Pour not so much water, becomes tummy. Pour water, washes off the tumah. My hands are tahar right now. I make a bracha. Great. Next case, I take a full revius, I pour it over my whole hand. What's the halacha? The halacha is it's all tar, and I can now go to my next hand, and I can now move on. Now, im naga bahem acher. Someone touches you, shaloi natal yadav. He did not wash your hands while your hands are still wet. Now we pause. Very important. What does wet mean? What does wet mean? It means teifeach al menas latfiach, which in English means it's wet enough to make something that touches it wet to touch something else. Teifeach, my hand's wet, so if I touch something, this will become wet enough that you can now wipe liquid off of that. Teifeach al menas latfiach. Now, in English that means it's very wet. The difference is going to be in a moment where we're going to talk about drying your hands. It's going to be clear that even if there's a little bit of water in your hands, it's not a problem. Because tumah only transmits if your hands are fully wet, we'll call it. We'll just use the words fully wet, very wet, versus, just a little bit of water on it. So anytime you're going to see wet, it's really wet. But as soon as you dry it a little bit already, you're going to be out of that, which is, by the way, a big savior in everything we're about to talk about. Because in a lot of these cases, when you touch with your other hand, someone touches you, you're walking back and you bump into someone, you dried your hands, but they're not fully dry. Usually, they're dry. They might still be a little bit wet. You might not have gotten every drop. Your towel might have been wet. It might have been some bad paper towels. But your hands are dry. In halachic terms, they're not called oidan leichos min hamayim. But now, let's say they are. So you just finished watching, and the guy next to you touches your hand. Sarich linagvam, you got to dry it v'lachzar v'litol, and wash it again. Shaharei zeh timam al yedei hamayim aleihem, cause it's being metameh via the waters that's on it. So far, we all good. We're all on the same page. Everyone's good. Very good. Let's continue reading. We're reading a mechaber over here. Lekach, therefore. No, I don't want to read lekach. Ve'im, and it continues. V'natal kol yad mei revius. If you wash your whole hand from revius, ein sarach l'chol zeh. You don't have to worry about anything. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ratza Leimar, you don't have to worry about anything. But mikol makam yesh li zayer, that someone else should not touch you. So now, what it seems like is going on over here is, if you wash your full hand with a revius, do you have to be careful not to touch your other hand? It seems like no.
The wet should not touch that?
The other way. The dry should not touch the wet, because then you're going to be mitame yourself. But again, I'm going to tell you what's going on over here. But Mishnah Berurah says you should be able to someone else not touching you. Now, what in the world is the difference? It's complicated. There's a large shartzin over here that quotes a Magen Avraham, that quotes a Pri Megadim, that quotes a Shulchan Aruch Harav, that they're all big Z fighting, and the shartzin ends off, Sarich Ian Lamaisa. Whenever a shartzin ends off Sarich Ian Lamaisa, I'm not that proficient in Mishnah Berurah, but it's not that common. It's not that common. When that happens, that means there's something confusing going on over here. And that is exactly what's going on over here. Because on one hand, if it was a full revius, you should be fully tar. On the other hand, if something tummy touches it, your hands are tfeach, it should still be metameit. There is a Magen Avraham. It could have something to do with, are you still called during the washing process? That could be part of the fine nuance. But with that, we're going to leave it. So what's halacha that we're taking out of this whole thing? That when you're washing your hands, don't have anyone touch you. And if someone touches you before you make the bracha, you're in hot water. Now you're in a serious problem. Because what do you do now? What do you do?
Wash again.
You can just wash again?
Touch something else.
So say the Baiskim, dry your hands, touch something tameh to make them really tameh, then wash them again, and then make a bracha. Which no one really wants them to. Why can you wash again is a very good question. It's a very good question.
Isn't the fact that somebody touched you make you come already?
It does. It's a very good question. It's a very good question. Let's leave it at that.
There's between regular tummy and for short tummy.
Right. Everyone's asking the same question. If someone touches your tummy, so let's just leave it. We'll leave it unclear. It's a good question. I had the same issue. I do see some of the places are busy. Maybe, and let's go to something lighter for one moment before I take your question. How much water should he use? A lot. Why should he use a lot? Come on. No, come on. We all know. So you become rich. School of Ashiros. We're now learning halacha, so you all thought the answer was so you cover your whole hand, and so you don't get tameh. No, says the Shulchan Aruch, Sif Tes over here. I told you it's a little bit lighter. You shouldn't have anything on it. Once you have a revius, you don't got to worry about anything. The Gemara Shabbos says you should be careful. Why? Because if you don't use a lot of water, you're going to be, God forbid, poor and other issues, says the Gemara in Shabbos. And it means more than a revius. Which, by the way, how much is a revius? A revius is anywhere between 3 and 6 ounces. Anywhere between those two.
For that full cup. Fill up the cup.
Overflowing. Yeah. That's your kaisa. You want your kaisa bracha. That's all the school of the gezachet. But again. So that's where the Mishnah Berurah, but the Mishnah Berurah says, this is Mishnah Berurah talks to all of us, that okay, so the bottom line is, so why when you ask someone when he's washing his hands, why is he overflowing the cup? Why is he using a lot of water? So he says, Skilaf Hashiros, and he says, I don't want to be poor, and he says, I learned to Gemara and Shabbos, says the Mishnah Berurah, Lefikach. Let's read this Mishnah Berurah together. Again, I apologize that you all do not have it in front of you. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sivkatan Lamed Ches. Hayil shebe'arnu shtochli zar shli. No, I don't want to read you the whole thing. No, you quoted the wrong Mishnah Berurah. Okay, so I'm in the wrong place. Let me look one more time for the Mishnah Berurah. Basically, the Mishnah Berurah says that even though there's all these other reasons, that you should do it for air. Sargli zar ben Netilas Yadaim shekolam mizalzel ben Netilas Yadaim. Chayiv nidoy, pretty bad. Ubalade anios, pretty worse. And the worst of all, v'nekar min ha'ilam. I don't know what exactly that means. Your nekar min ha'ilam, but it does not sound doesn't sound great. Says the Shulchan Aruch continues. Even though you only need a revius, Yosef litzel b'shefa. Interesting. Again, I don't know the word shefa. Is a very popular word these days. Here, the Mishnah Berurah, the Bechaver use it. The Amar Rav Chisda. The Shulchan Aruch here is quoting a Gemara. Again, lots of interesting things going on here. Ana mashi miloi chafnai maya v'yavu li milo chafnai tivusa. Says Rav Chisda, I filled up with a lot of water, and Hashem filled up my quote-unquote cup with a lot of goodness. And says the Mishnah Berurah on that line, Mikol Makayim lechatchila toiv yoser shel yaseh b'shvilzeh. Even though you're going to get bracha, and even though you're not going to come poor, and even though you're not going to come uprooted from the world, and even though you're not going to go to chirim and all other good things, but that's not the right way to do it. Do amanas lekabel bras aliyaseh akol lechved Hashem yisbarach v'asachar memeli yavai umisha zahir bazeh ve'ena misasher hu mibnei shemaisav ma'akvin. I guess that's a klal in all segulos, that anytime you do it and it doesn't work, it's because we have other issues. So, Lamaisa, we're using a lot of water for multiple reasons. So now, yeah?
The case is if you said that if somebody touches you, then you should wipe it off and do that something. What if your other hand, you haven't washed your other hand yet?
Oh, do you have to, yeah, very good.
Then you can say the bracha on...
Right. So then you can just wash that one off and start again. Yeah. So now, okay, let's move on. Let's go into making the bracha. Well, when do you make the bracha when you wash your hands? After you wash your hands. Has anyone ever seen anyone do anything different? No. I'm talking about we're only up to washing yet. But before they washed. Let's think about it. Kol mitzvah mevarchan aleihem oiver lasi yasa. And you take your talis, you make a bracha, then you put it on. You take your tefillin, you make a bracha, then you put it on. You take your tittis, make a bracha, then you put it on. You take your ab, you make a bracha. It's not good to write. So you can't make a bracha when your hands are tummy. This is Gemara in Psach and Daf Zayin Amud Beis. That comes to say Varach Aleim Oiver Lasi Yasam. So the question is, what's going on in Mitzvah Netilas Yadaim? So if you want to see inside, if you look over here, note number 16, it's on page number 4. The Torah quotes from the Torah over here explains that Pa'amim Ein Yadam Nekiyas, your hands aren't clean. And therefore, since your hands are not clean, you're not able to make the bracha tiknu, and therefore they were misaked that you make the bracha afterwards. Very fascinating. You turn over the page over here, it quotes a Rosh, and the Rosh says, what is the precedent for this item to make the bracha after you do the action?
The issue of not
No, the
comment for the bracha is only because it's for the hands, because you can say brachas even without washing.
So that's a little bit of a difficult point. Yes and no, and maybe so. This is the reason why before you daven, you're supposed to wash your hands. Why are you supposed to wash your hands? Because you're davening. There's two reasons brought down. Either because you're like a kohen being mishamish, doing that void, or because your hands are going to be tummy, and how can you say the Shem Hashem? So then the question is, how come every shahakal that we say, we don't wash our hands? We don't. Maril says you do. And no, the Mishmur actually quotes it by mitzvahs. You should know, it is interesting. By mitzvahs, the Mishabura quotes many times. By B'dikas Chametz, Mishabura quotes it. By Netilas Lulav, Mishabura quotes it. And he says you should wash your hands beforehand because you're doing a mitzvah. But there it's more. It's not just out the bracha. Lav dafka. It doesn't seem like that's the reason. But interesting is the Rosh over here says the precedent is tvila. Tvilas mikvah. Which tvilas mikvah? Tvilas mikvah, the real tvilas mikvah. What's the real tvilas mikvah? No, not a woman, obviously, not Kerry. No, the real ger. Close, ger. When a ger is megayer, that's the real tefillah. We learn everything from there. Says the Rosh over here that he says that. You want, just like by a ger, you cannot make a bracha beforehand. Why not? Because he's not a yid. So therefore, we make all tefillahs together. This is similar to a woman going to the mikvah, which we spoke about at the end of before Pesach, that she also makes the bracha after going to the mikvah. We had mentioned that Sfardim, the Machaber, disagrees, and the Machaber holds that you make the bracha before you go into the mikvah. But we paskin, like the Ashkenazim, the Ramah, that you make it afterwards. That's because all tevilahs, and now we're learning that Netilas Yadaim at some levels, a din of tevilah, all have the same din, that you're going to do it afterwards. But now, what's interesting, or I shall say even fascinating, is that the Be'er Halacha says, what if your hands are clean? What if your hands are clean? You know your hands are clean. You can make the bracha before washing your hands. Just like every mitzvah says, say, you make the bracha before your hands. He quotes over here.
Then why are you washing? Clean from what?
Clean. Let's say clean. Let's say, you're a holy Jew. You just went from davening and you sat down and you learned and your hands were in front of you and you were shomer al yadayim. You didn't touch anything, and then you went to eat bread. So you're still going to have to wash out the gzeirah or abanon that we spoke about, shrach, tuma, truma, or because anytime you're isik in food, we're not sure. So, but interesting, the Be'er Halacha says that. He quotes over here, I don't know, that's why I asked if anyone's ever seen it. He says, Rav Shechter recites the bracha before washing his hands. Fascinating. That's all I'm going to comment on that one. If anyone has any other knowledge, I would love to, yeah, for sure. I would love to know about it. Lemaisa Sfardim agree with us on this one, and they even make the bracha after washing your hands. So this is
Is that a steer than what you said before?
why.
If when your hands are tahor, you can say still the bracha.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no reason to wipe your hand, meaning the whole process of wiping it, touch something in order to come tameh. You don't even have to be tameh to say the bracha.
Don't even have to be
Like you said,
tamei.
it's better to touch something to become tameh for sure.
Yeah, no. I agree. No, I agree. No, I agree. It just makes it more fair. I agree. I think the answer is, like you were saying, it's For that little dot of suffix, we do it, even though we lamaisa paskin, you're allowed to, but in the world of But yeah, no, I do agree. I do agree. Now, the Mishmur over here writes that the real reason we make your bracha afterwards is because your hands might be dirty, and therefore we want to make sure that you're making the bracha afterwards, not necessarily for this other reasons that it was a gzera derabanan, that it's like tefillas ger, etc. So now, where this conversation continues is, what about drying your hands? What about drying your hands? Because what we just learned that the bracha is a very unique bracha. Again, let's assume our hands are dirty, so I can't make a bracha right now. So I wash my hands. Now my hands are clean. Now I make a bracha. Now, yeah?
Is there a thing that it should drip down to your, down your sleeve, like the water should drip down?
We could go a little Kabbalistic for a moment. So the answer to your question is yes and no. If you don't use a lot of water, that's why part of the complication of these halachas is the Mechaber, the Mishmur, keeps on reminding us that once you use a lot of water, these things don't apply. But theoretically, if you didn't use a lot of water, so now again, I washed one time, the water's tamei. I wash a second time, it washes away the tamei water. Let's say the second time I washed, there's one dot of water in my hand that didn't get water from the second washing. So that dot is tamei. So now, if I were to then put my hands downward, that dot is going to roll down my hands and go and be mitam in my hands. That's why the Mishnah Berurah does, the Shulchan Aruch, Mishnah Berurah writes, you should lift up your hands till you make the bracha, because you don't want your hands to become re-tamed. But now, once you're using a lot of water and there's nothing on your hands, you don't have to worry about that. But however, anyone who's ever seen a good Hasidic Yid wash his hands, they all raise up their hands. The question is why? The answer is because Al Pi Kabbalah, again, the Piskei Tshuva writes, he's my source for Kabbalah. He says, basically, Sefer Sheish V'Avoda, etc., that they also say a pasuk. I don't know if anyone ever seen that. When you see Yidechem Kodesh Baruch Hashem, which we're about to get you is a serious potential shayla. How in the world could you talk right now? You're in the middle of a mitzvah. We just said you're making the bracha afterwards because you should make it before. You just can't because your hands are tummy. So imagine, you take your lulav, you take your tefillin, you go, you put it on, right before you make, what would be a good example? How would be a good equation?
Say the bracha then.
No, here you didn't say the bracha yet. That's the problem. You did the mitzvah, well, because fillin's backwards, right? That's why it's hard to say. But you did the mitzvah, you now have to make the bracha to go backwards. We have a backwards bracha, which is very difficult already. And now you're saying, say Yidechem Kodesh Baruch Hashem. What are you, Yidechem Kodeshing? You have to make your bracha. But we'll get to Al Pi Kabbalah, it's all allowed, and Lamaisei have what to be semichan.
The water's on the palm. The water's over here to make it worse.
No, the word. So we're assuming that a normal person always gets more to the bottom of his hand than the top of his hand when they wash. That's what we're assuming. But yeah, I do agree. But Al Pi Kabbalah, he says you're supposed to pick them up. In case anyone wants to know, I read it. I was fascinated. He says your palms should be open and outspread as if you're accepting something. It should be kineged your. I think he says your lave, your heart, and I think he says that your elbow should be angled inward, something like this. I don't know. I'm feeling a little bit like a priest, but I'm not sure. Us Yisraelim have a hard time with this. And then you're accepting the bracha. You're accepting the bracha, and then you'll see many Chassidish Haimish Yid. That is what they do. But okay, let's go to drying your hands. So now we're about to realize that the drying is incredibly important, because now that we just realized that the bracha is going backwards. Before we even see anything inside, we're about to see a Gemara in Saita, and note number 20 over here. Before we see that, let's just think outside for a second. You did a mitzvah, you need to make a bracha. You should have made it before, you couldn't. Okay, so now one would think, right away you got to make this bracha. Furthermore, if I do anything before I make this bracha, I'm potentially messing myself up. Just like in every Maisa mitzvah, if I split, I know what the example would be. It's going to be hard for our brains. But the example would be, on your tefillin, you make a bracha, and then before you wrap the tefillin, you start saying psukim. That would be the same example. Because the bracha and the maisa need to be connected. So by us, the maisa comes first, the bracha comes second, but they still need to be connected. So if I do anything in the middle, we're going to come up with a problem. So now, let's understand what happens when one dries our hands. Says the Gemara in Saita that if you eat bread without drying your hands, can we take a poll? Let's take a poll for a moment before we were not skewed in a good way by halacha. When one washes his hands before he eats food, do you make sure to dry your hands before you eat food? Not in bread halacha. I'm talking about etiquette, whatever goes on in this building. Do you eat food with wet hands? No. Let's say food you were going to pick up with wet hands. A piece of pizza. Would anyone pick up a piece of pizza with wet hands? No. Okay, good. Everyone agrees. And I had it out of my mind that it's strange. I had it out of my mind. But that's good. That's what Allah is about to say. So we're all in accordance with Allah is about to teach us that it's strange and it's disgusting. You don't touch food with wet hands. I was like thinking a little bit like, is it such a big deal? I don't know. But anyways, that's...
What you dry your hands on?
Okay, yeah, whatever. Says Gemara in Saita that what happens if you eat bread without drying your hands? Ki'ilu oichel lechem tameh. Now this is, again, everyone who had issues before with this whole tumah business, this is getting more complicated. There's no tumah anymore. Your hands are tahor. You washed your hands 16 times with gallons of water. There is no tumah. What in the world? The Gemara teaches us that if your hands are not dry, it's as if you eat tameh bread. Shenamar says in the pasuk, Yamar Hashem kacha yachlu b'nei Yisrael lechmam tameh. And Rashi over here says, why? Rashi says that the ki'ilu is a big ki'ilu. Sometimes it's a little ki'ilu and it's a big ki'ilu. This ki'ilu, says Rashi, kol ha'echel bli nigav yadayim davar ma'asu. It's disgusting. V'chashiv, and it's considered ki tuma, like tuma. That's how Rashi learns. There are others who learn, the Mordechai learns, that no, there's some tumah there. Again, and now you're starting to realize that there's some imaginary tumah going on in this sugya. Says the Mordechai, the drying is removing that last vestiges of tumah. There was no tumah there? Good question. Mishnah Berurah in one place says, maybe there's one dot somewhere. Maybe, you pour it on a lot of water, but maybe. And then he says, but if you use a lot of water, then not. But you still have to be very careful about drying your hands. Why? Because of this other reason of davar mos. So now, what just happened is amazing. Is that when you dry your hands, it's a chelik of the mitzvah. It's a chelik of the mitzvah because you're removing some of the tumah by drying your hands. Or, either you're removing the tumah, or if you don't dry your hands, it's as if it's disgusting, which at some level is a quote-unquote tumah. Based off of this, what do we see? We see that now maybe we have a beautiful invention, that the bracha just became over lasiyasan. What was our original question? That you have to make a bracha before doing the mitzvah. What's the mitzvah of Netilas Yadaim? The mitzvah is to get rid of the tumah from your hands. So now if we're learning that the drying of your hands is a portion of the mitzvah, the drying removes those last vestiges of tamah. The drying makes it's not disgusting, which also has some level of tamah. So now when you make the bracha, it is over lasiyasan.
You shouldn't be allowed to do it till after that.
Yeah.
No, the opposite. Hafuch. No, I knew you were going to say that.
You're saying that there is
According to
tumah.
No. So the answer, good. Good. Let's. You're asking, but the answer is that it's the ki'ilu. That's the ki'ilu. But we're just gaining that it's at some level. But now what we're realizing is that is it important to make the bracha before drying your hands? The answer is yes. Is that it's very important to make the bracha for drying your hands. Now comes on the place and they ask a very interesting question. We just said that the drying is important. So do you have to dry it? We just said, let's just play out what we just said for a moment. We just said, your hands are tameh, you come to eat bread. You want to wash your hands. What do? You pour water once, you pour water twice. You pour water once, you pour water twice. Or maybe you just want to adopt like the Chazon Ish. Why? Because you realize that it works better. You take a lot of water, pour it over your whole hand, and that works. Take a lot of water, pour it over your whole hand, and it works. Maybe don't do it when people are watching. People think that you're strange. But okay, listen, it's probably better to follow Allah and be strange than the opposite. But either way, so you pour fully on one hand, you fully on the next hand. Excellent. So what do? Your hands are tahar. Now you have to make a bracha. Excellent. When do you make the bracha? Right now, before you dry your hands. Why before you dry your hands? Because the drying, we'll call it is the hashlama, is the completion of the mitzvah, removing those last little bits of tumah, of whatnot. So is the drying important? Can I just let my hands air dry? That what? Oh, you mean to be totally in machlekes?
If you're not eating now, so when you're asking,
No, I'm eating. I want to go to the air dryer in the bathroom, and I want to let my hands be blown off. I'm not drying them, and then I'll eat. I'm going to make sure they're dry. Meaning, is there an action called drying your hands? This is amazing. The Chachani says, the Chazon Ish says, no problem. You have two reasons to dry your hands. Reason number one is that it's disgusting to eat with wet hands. Reason number two is that your hands might have some tum on it, so you dry it off. However, the Shulchan Aruch Harav and the B'tzal Chachmas is based off of the Shulchan Aruch Harav, which is the Balatanya, the Gras, seems to say that there's an action called drying. And he wants to say that you have to actually dry it with a towel and not with an air blower or not letting it air dry. That's how the Graz learns this machlekes, the Gemara. The Gemara. That's how he's learning it into the Gemara. That's how he's learning it into the Gemara. I'm sorry, what are you saying?
If you were stuck in the woods and you needed to eat, you dunk in the river.
Yeah.
And you don't have the towel.
So according to the Graz, you'd have an issue. Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, so I was thinking that also. What is this called? What is this called? I was thinking this is called me. Especially because my hands are really hurting right now. But I would think that's, I'm hitting the water off. That's what I would think. I don't know. I was thinking that also. I don't know. My hands hurting. I don't know.
Your hands by a fire pit,
Maybe. But anyways, I just thought to teach you. Obviously, halach l'maisa. Let's, it's very fascinating. But tachlis, just make sure to dry your hands and then move on.
What's the mind of using to dry it? I'm saying to...
I would say I want to add on, excuse me. Again, in the case that you're using a full revius, then it could be this whole thing doesn't apply. This goes back to the same circle that we keep on going on. Because the whole drying is to remove any last vestiges of tumah. There's no vestiges of tumah if you use revius. But it's maz. Still maz. This is where the Graz gets very...
Now you got even worse, because now your hands are super wet.
Now your hands are super wet. Okay. Very good. Aruch HaShulchan writes very violently. Aruch HaShulchan writes that, of course, you should dry your hands because it's disgusting to eat with wet hands. And, Sorry, what's the question? I don't think anyone says to make it while you're drying it. I think that's a mistake. I don't think it says you make it while you're drying it. I don't see anyone in print that says that. But let's get there right now. Let's get there right now. So now what's the next step? So we know why we wash our hands. And we know that we make a bracha, and we know why we dry our hands. So before we discuss when we dry the hands, the question is, at this stage over here, washing, bracha, drying, what if you talk? What if you talk over here? So this is the classical myth. Everyone, I'm going to speak out the bookends. Everyone thinks, and if you watch anyone washing, you see this all day and night. As you're washing, you're busy schmoozing, you're busy talking, you finish schmoozing, you dry, you make a bracha, and then you sit down. No talking. Everyone thinks that it's when you finish, when you make the bracha, all of a sudden now it's like the worst thing in the world to make a bracha. But while you're washing, it's no big deal. But now we're just going to think out loud together. We all understand already that now that we understand that the bracha goes on the washing. If you speak over there, that's a serious problem. That's like speaking before you make your shahakal on a cup of water, and before you take a drink, you start talking to the guy next to you. What do? You just cut off your shahakal from the drink. Over here, if you talk before you make the bracha, you cut off the bracha from the washing. Similarly, that's going to be the most extreme, which is what the most people do, unfortunately. Similarly is going to be if you talk between the bracha and the drying is not as bad, but we're seeing that the drying is also important as it's finishing off your washing. So it's also going to be important. It's also good.
People would think
Right. Of course. Now, once you made the bracha, once your hands are dry, now, are you allowed to talk? So now, theoretically, the mitzvah is done. You did your Netilas Yadaim. You made your bracha, your hands are dry. We spoke about last week, what if you decide at this point that, I have no bread? We said that there's a ritva, but lamaisa, you don't have to go run after bread because you did what you needed to do. Now it's a new mitzvah to eat the food. So now there's a new halacha, a mitzvah of tekef l'netila bracha. Tekef l'netila, that you're supposed to eat the bread right away. Just like we know when it comes to kiddush, all these halachas, you're supposed to do everything right away. That's a separate halacha. That's the halacha that we all know. If you say past the salt, no big deal. Even if you by accident talk, no big deal. But if you accident talk in the beginning, yes, big Deal. That is the
You're sitting
halacha.
there, you're waiting for everyone else to wash.
Yeah.
That's why you're not talking. It's not changing anything.
No. So the answer is it's still going to be called a hefsek at some level. You're right. So the truth is you shouldn't even be sitting there, right? The lichatchila should be wash, bracha, dry, eat. But now you're talking about in a meal. Yeah, I understand. You're talking about in a meal. So even in there, the answer is the best would be not to talk, obviously, because no, it's still you still want.
It's not getting any quicker.
No. But still, it's still. Of course, it has chadas.
I said it might be. So that's
Right.
what I'm saying.
No. So the din of takef l'netila bracha, that din includes in it to not be mafsik.
It's quality.
It's a din. It's a separate din. I'm not saying you're allowed to do it. I'm just pointing out it's not a din in the netila. Your netila was done glad kosher. Check plus. You washed your hands. You dried your hands. You made your bracha perfect. Now you have a new din to connect the bread with that. So you're right. You're in a bad situation. You have to wait 3 minutes for everyone to wash. Great, no problem. L'maisa were mekel, but still you try as much as you can to not talk. But if you were to talk, they asked the Netilas Yadaim, and they said, what if someone asks you the time and you're not thinking, and you tell them the time? So that's a hefsek. He says, no, it's not really a hefsek because you already finished, and it's just a new din of takef l'netila bracha. This is the Gemara in Shabbos. The Gemara brachas, I know we're jumping all over here, but the Gemara bracha says, Amar Rav sholish tkifasim. There's 3 things that have to be done right away. It's note number 27. Takef l'smicha shchita, takef l'geula tefila, takef l'netilas yadaim bracha. These 3 things have to be done right away, and that's a new din of takef. No, they still won't become tamei.
No, you don't touch something.
Correct.
That's the reason why. That's why it was.
Yeah.
The reason why not to talk.
No, it's a new din. It's a din in takef. Now, it's a machlekes rishayim, even if it's even referring to what we're talking about. The Torah says, you know what it's talking about? It's talking about mayim achrayim. After you wash mayim achrayim, you should bench. According to the Torah, there's no reason. Once you finish, okay, whatever.
Take it from Tila Bracha.
No, that's what I'm saying. You missed it. No. The Torah says, talking about mayim achrayim. It's not even Pasha talking about mayim rishayim. I'm going one step further than you. The Torah says this is talking about mayim achrayim. Mayim achrayim. The Rosh argues, and the Rosh, you can look over here, note number 28. The Rosh argues, take of l'netila bracha mayim rishayim kai. That's how the Rosh learns. The Mishnah Berurah says. No, he explains. He's talking about the bracha. If you look at the Mishnah Berurah in Sivkat and Aleph says that once you finish everything and you're just waiting to make the bracha of hamaitzi, a little bit of talking is not so bad. Here, we'll read it inside. This is like earth-shattering because this goes against everything that unfortunately we were confused with as kids. Din hafsaka bein bitzia linetila. Yesh aimrim she'ein. Sorry, listen to this one. The first sheet in the Mechaber. Some say you do not need to be careful malahafsik from making hafsik bein netila lahamaitzi. Jew opens up Mechaber, doesn't know anything about Judaism. The first opinion says, okay, we just finished learning, I don't know how many sifim about washing, about making the bracha, about drying your hands. Excellent. Now, what about the hamaitzi? The first opinion says, no big deal. You don't have to worry about it. The Yesh Aimrim, the second opinion says, no, you should be careful. Sarach li zahir. Between, again, Netila and the hamaitzi. Says the Mechaber, toiv. It's good to be zahir. And he says, and if you waited an amount of time for whatever, it's not called a hefsik. And the Mishnah Berurah over here speaks out, based on this Gemara, take him the Netila bracha, says the Mishnah Berurah that as long as you don't wait too long, he says even a little bit of talking you don't have to worry about. So it really gives us a completely new orientation of which part of the washing and of the talking you have to be careful about. So to wrap it all up, as we're out of time, there's basically 3 stages when it comes to Netilas Yadaim. You washed your hands, you didn't make the bracha. You made the bracha, you didn't dry your hands. Washed your hands, made the bracha, dried your hands, you didn't eat the bread yet. So now we understand, we'll go backwards. At the 3rd stage is the most lenient. Again, even though most people think that's the most chamer, is the most lenient at that 3rd stage. If you talk, but it's fine. As long as you don't have a large hefsek, it's fine. At the second stage, which is again after you made the bracha, but you didn't dry your hands yet, at that second stage, you shouldn't talk. But if you did, no, it's okay. L'maisa Sfardim are much more machmer over here, and Sfardim say you're not allowed to talk there. And the first stage, that's the biggest problem, is when you wash your hands before you make the bracha, the Mishnah Berurah paskins, you have to wash again. And we'll conclude with what's is very relevant is saying amen. The guy, you washed your hands and you're making the bracha. The guy before you washed his hands and made a bracha. Can you say amen to his bracha? Based on what we just said, in these 3 stages, that's going to be the answer. Once you finish making the bracha and drying your hands, you're allowed to say amen. Once you're in the middle stage that you made your bracha and you didn't dry your hands, you're still allowed to say amen. But when you're in the first stage, that what? You washed your hands, but you didn't even make your bracha, that is the most stringent. You should not even say amen in that portion. Gavaldik. We'll pick up from here with Siyat Ishmaya next.